On March 3rd, U.S. Special Forces launched a joint operation with Ecuador against terrorist operations in the nation. This footage you're watching right now was released by the U.S. government, showing operators conducting an air assault helicopter raid on a terrorist cell in Ecuador. This may be the first time in history that U.S. operators are preparing to engage in ground combat with our allies in Ecuador. The action that's being taken is, of course, in partnership with the Ecuadorian military, who are spearheading the mission. There's actually a long history of cooperation and partnership between the two nations, both militarily and economically, that we'll get into. Ay caramba, it'd be easy to miss this historic military operation because of everything that's going on around the world. But according to my average grunt-level geopolitical analysis, this is all connected. Look, first they hit Maduro in Venezuela, then they hit Mexico's top cartel boss El Mencho, and then they hit the Ayatollah all the way in Iran. And now this in Ecuador. That all can't be a coincidence, right? Because the US is trying to completely rearrange the global chessboard. But the big question is, will it work or will it backfire? The reason for this action is because intelligence now estimates that 70% of the world's cocaine exports flows through Ecuador, even though they don't produce any of it. Cocaine is now regularly hidden in their banana shipments from their main port of Guayaquil. These are then shipped to America and Europe. Shockingly, it's become the key logistics node exploited by the cartel within just the last few years. Now, you might be wondering, how the heck and why are US soldiers helping in Ecuador?
This video is sponsored by Raycon. As we head into spring, you guys, one of the things that I did was I set up a personal gym downstairs. One of my favorite things to do is to listen to my Raycon earbuds. I listen to work, different projects that I have because I need the high quality sound. And at the same time, I'm still able to be situationally aware, while at the same time being able to hear my wife call from upstairs saying she might need my help. So I use these a lot when I travel, especially as if I go to the airport and I need to be able to hear when my flight is arriving. These are really great for that. They don't shut you off completely from the world, so you're not totally antisocial, so you can hear your puppy. If your puppy's calling for you, get Raycons for 20% off. It's the perfect time to try them. I use this and you guys should too. It has a 13-hour battery life and IP68 waterproof and dustproof. Plus, over 3 million customers use them. They already love Raycon, and they come with a 30-day happiness guarantee.
The bone conduction headphones are perfect for refreshing your routine this spring. Just click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/CappyArmyBC to get 20% off. Thank you, Raycon, for sponsoring. Now, the expansion of land operations by the American military into Ecuador marks a turning point in Operation Southern Spear as it continues to evolve. So far, Southern Spear has killed over 150 suspected narco-terrorists in 45 separate strikes. Ecuador's defense minister told Reuters that it was working with the United States military in a quote-unquote offensive operation, and added that some of the details were classified. It's believed that the new U.S. military counter-cartel task force, the one that helped take down El Mencho, is also helping in Ecuador. And this is wild because Ecuador was famously one of the safest countries in Latin America throughout the whole 2010s. In fact, homicide rates were far below the regional average. But just in the last few years, it has totally collapsed into a violent narco-terrorist killing field. The murder rate surged from, get this, 13 per 100,000 people in 2021 to roughly 45 per 100,000 people by 2023. Since then, it's remained among the most dangerous places in all of the Americas. So this violence culminated in cartel gang members trying to take over a TV station during a live news broadcast that was going out over the airwaves. Car bombs were going off outside, assassinations of leaders were happening left and right. Their president, Daniel Noboa, then instituted martial law and surged the army out into the streets to fight back, capturing thousands of cartel gunmen. Southcom commander in charge of American forces in the region, General Donovan, said, quote, "The operations are a powerful example of the commitment of partners in Latin America and the Caribbean to combat the scourge of narco-terrorism. Together, we are taking decisive action to confront narco-terrorists who have long inflicted terror, violence, and corruption on citizens throughout the hemisphere. We commend the men and women of the Ecuadorian armed forces for their unwavering commitment to this fight, demonstrating courage and resolve through continued actions against narco-terrorists in their country. So what happened is the operators moved in early in the morning, they flew in over an area and they exfiltrated their soldiers from where they did a raid, hitting the gangs. A US government official who spoke to the New York Times said that the video shown there depicted the first in what was expected to be a series of raids across Ecuador. They said US Special Forces soldiers are advising Ecuadorian commandos on raids throughout the country, providing intelligence and logistics support against suspected drug shipment facilities and other drug-related sites. This should come as no surprise, since Secretary of State Marco Rubio hinted joint strikes with Ecuador was coming soon. The American unit on the ground is likely part of Special Forces 7th Group. They're the guys who learn Spanish and take a year of cultural language classes to best understand the history and context of the people living in Latin America and the challenges that they face. The reason this is historic is because US operators have never been publicly invited before in recent history to have boots on the ground during these operations in South America. Diplomatically, that's been off limits, but as the situation deteriorated inside Ecuador recently, it meant that their president Noboa started to look for allies to help him defeat the gangs. In 2025, Noboa proposed a constitutional change to allow the United States to once again operate a military base inside Ecuador, but the people in Ecuador voted and rejected the proposal and were strongly against it. The United States and Ecuador together as a team launched this joint military operation against designated terrorist organizations in South America country, according to the Pentagon. Now, what are these terror groups? We're all familiar with the Mexican cartels, the Jalisco New Generation, and the Sinaloa cartels, but the key players here in Ecuador are a little bit different. The two main ones are the Los Chernos, which is historically the most powerful gang in the country, and they have strong ties to Mexico's Sinaloa cartel, and then the other one is the Los Lobos, which is one of the largest rival factions, and they are closely linked to the rival Mexican cartel, the CJNG. So you have the cartel turf war from Mexico is being imported into Ecuador, and we'll find out why that's the case. So I've listed the other gangs here too if you're curious, but these gangs operate as logistics and export partners for the Mexican cartels. How? By controlling ports, prisons, and most importantly, the cocaine routes from Colombia and their neighbors in Peru. Then it extends into Europe and the United States. In fact, 80% of cocaine arriving in Europe comes through Ecuador, largely through the port of Guayaquil. European demand has exploded recently. Cocaine use across the EU has increased by roughly 60% over the last decade, making it the most profitable target for traffickers. That's why you see Polish special forces arresting Mexican cartel members all the way in Eastern Europe. Here, they are capturing a Sinaloa cartel member who's cooking up some meth just casually in Poland, as one does, because the problem is spilling over everywhere now. This US military action is a clear expansion of the grand strategy of the Southern Hemisphere, capturing Maduro, killing El Mencho, capturing Russian shadow oil tankers, striking drug boats in the Caribbean Sea and the Eastern Pacific, and now clamping down in where the logistics node is in Ecuador against the drug traffickers. What we're seeing is a slow tightening of the noose. And where are they circling around? If we were tracking a serial killer and marking all the locations that he's killing at, we would see a pattern here. As a geopolitical detective, I can surmise that they're circling strikes around Colombia. Colombia is, of course, the cocaine capital of the entire world. 70% of the world's cocaine originates in Colombia. Colombia is, of course, neighbors with Ecuador. The President Noboa hinted at what was to come, saying on X, "We are launching a new phase against narco-terrorism and illegal mining. In the month of March, we will conduct joint operations with our regional allies, including the United States. The security of Ecuadorians is our priority, and we will fight to achieve peace in every corner of the country." But how did it get to this point? The United States and Ecuador have been aligned since 1947 with the Rio Treaty, which was the post-World War II security agreement that saw them coordinate in a shared goal of fighting against communism. By the late 1980s, 2000s, when Colombia's problem with drug trafficking had surged, it meant that the US and Ecuador, they increased their security cooperation and they focused on counter-narcotics, surveillance, and border security. But here's where things start to get a little bit challenging, and it's what actually helps explain a lot of what we're seeing throughout Latin America right now. The US, under President Clinton, gave about $3 million to Ecuador in security assistance. Essentially, what happened was, in 1995, Ecuador got in the Cenepa War with Peru, and it was very expensive. So Ecuador went into heavy debt from it, and there was a banking collapse for a lot of reasons that I'm going to oversimplify here, and there was a currency crash, and many Ecuadorian people immigrated to the United States, leading to a population of nearly 1 million people living there in the US today. To get out of debt, Ecuador took on millions of dollars of bailout money from the IMF bank. They paid the bank back with interest for decades. Their leaders started feeling like they were being taken advantage of by this Western institution and that they were in debt slavery. But there's a big problem. Ecuador's economy is what's known as having the commodity curse. They're almost entirely dependent on oil and bananas. They never transitioned away from this. And starting in 1999, the US Air Force set up an American-operated airbase from Manta, conducting counter-narcotics surveillance flights across the Eastern Pacific. It was one of the most effective ways that helped stop Colombian drug traffickers from going over the border into Ecuador. So what happened next is, during the early 2000s, the price of oil, boom, skyrocketed to the moon, and US counter-narcotics operations against Colombia were at their height in Ecuador, so they too were at a time where they were handing out free defense money like they were Oprah. That shit was bananas. So Ecuador, they were getting rich off that oil, and they were like, fuck you, you're cool, fuck you. And in 2007, the newly elected President Correa was very anti-American. He said, we don't want to pay back this debt anymore. He said, let's be close friends with China, and he took out a $20 billion loan from China. Correa increased public spending, increased investment in infrastructure, and increased money into social programs, and they took on huge investments from China, and Correa attempted to repay China with oil, and that actually worked really well at first. The cost of living went down, education rates went up, unemployment went down in the country, and salaries rose sky high in Ecuador. A lot of people had really nice, sweet government jobs that paid literally twice as well now. So China was building a ton of infrastructure and power facilities and power plants for them. The leader of the country, Rafael Correa, in 2009, didn't like that the US had an airbase in the country, and he kicked them out, which shut down the ability to monitor the drug lords' activity. Once the base was shut down, there was a resurgence of drug trafficking activities due to the diminished presence. Correa aligned himself closer to Venezuela, China, and Russia, all the adversaries of America. And according to this Army press publication, in 2014, Rafael Correa took decisive steps to reduce the presence of U.S. Department of Defense at the U.S. Embassy by closing the Security Cooperation Office. This move was part of a broader effort to assert Ecuador's sovereignty and minimize foreign military influence, and it reflected a significant shift in the country's foreign policy toward greater independence from U.S. military involvement. Correa raised concerns about what he viewed as an excessive number of U.S. military personnel in Ecuador, and he noted that approximately 50 military officers were there, and he questioned the justification for their presence. His administration requested the departure of all U.S. military members associated with the Security Cooperation Office. So President Correa in Ecuador instituted a policy of global citizenry, and he completely opened up the borders so that what happened was a lot of great people came in, and so a lot of criminals also came in from Colombia and Mexico, and they set up shop in the country. It imported the turf war from those nations. It seemed like nothing could go wrong though, because business was booming, the price of oil was huge, and then 2017 hit and the price of oil plummeted. Suddenly Ecuador couldn't pay back the money that they owed to China, all that $20 billion in debt, and Correa left office right before the fallout. He was then exiled, and he's now wanted in his home country on corruption and kidnapping charges, so he's living in asylum in Belgium since 2017. The oil price collapse hit Ecuador hard, since oil accounts for roughly a third of government revenue. Ecuador was in massive debt. They needed another bailout, but the IMF was like, only if you do through strict austerity measures and seriously cut back on spending. So they did. They cut prison wardens, they cut funding to police, they cut all kinds of services. It was brutal. Unemployment skyrocketed, prisons were filled up, and not enough staff was there to properly watch over them. Gangs took over the prisons. The cartel members that had slipped in over the border in the past 10 years started moving cocaine through the main port, and they took over, and the gangs began doing one of two things if you met them. You either paid insane protection money to them, or they bribed you, or they killed you. And they killed a lot of people. Journalists, politicians, like a lot of people. One of the saddest parts of all this, I think, is that a lot of people who were part of these gangs in Ecuador were poor people, young men who got offered 10 or 20 times the kind of pay money that they would normally get as a fisherman. And so a lot of times this crime is because they had no better option to make a better life for themselves. Then in 2023, Daniel Noboa took over office as the president of Ecuador. The son of the country's banana billionaire family. No joke. He was facing a horrific crisis. You can't make this shit up. He's like the Bruce Wayne of bananas. He cracked down hard, martial law style. The gangs tried sending hitmen over the border to assassinate him from Colombia, but the Ecuador security forces killed them. Since then, it's been a bit of a disaster. He's tried to clean up the country. Some love him for it and some hate him. Some call him evil and say he wants to destroy democracy. But I just can't imagine what it would be like to be somebody trying to live under the thumb of those brutal, violent gangs. The people twice voted to keep martial law going and for the crackdown on the gangs to continue. He's opened up gigantic floating prisons and mega prisons. Some say he's a strong man with an iron fist who's copying what they did in El Salvador under Bukele. The Biden administration in America opened up more cooperation with him by agreeing to send $25 million in security assistance, transfer a valuable C-130 cargo plane to help with logistics, and a $64 million M4 rifle deal. Now the Trump administration is doubling down on security alignment with Ecuador. Across Latin America, we've seen cartels fight one another for top dog spots to produce cocaine and other illicit substances like fentanyl to bring into the US. China has facilitated this by providing a majority of the precursor chemicals. Ecuador has become a safe haven for the Mexican cartels to traffic from. Here, we see Southern Command General Donovan meeting with President Noboa to, quote, discuss security cooperation and reaffirm the United States' strong commitment to support the nation's efforts to confront narco-terrorism and strengthen regional security. General Donovan said, quote, a lot of people think this is entirely easily solved by addressing the demand side, by tackling the demand for cocaine in Europe and the United States. That may have been the case 10 years ago, but now these organizations make enormous amounts of money from stealing fuel, extorting local businesses, and human trafficking. They would still exist to destabilize the Western Hemisphere even without the demand at this point. And when the problem gets bad enough, the mega prisons, the martial law, these are things that people vote and beg for, because otherwise you're unable to go outside your home safely. If you like this video, check out this one here or this playlist here. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy, ending transmission.